Have you ever heard a musician brag about the amount of time that they spend practicing? Maybe during band rehearsal or in the hallway before orchestra class. Maybe you've heard someone say, "Hey, I spent 5 hours practicing today." Or, "I practice at least 3 hours every day." The thing about these sorts of boasts is, while they may be true and impressive on their face, they don't necessarily tell you very much about that person's ability to actually play their instrument and perform well. While having the dedication and work ethic to put in lots of hours practicing is definitely a good thing, anyone who has taken the time to learn an instrument has had the experience of spending many hours practicing a song or technique, only to freeze up or otherwise disappoint themselves with their ability to perform that same song or technique under pressure. Frequently, the thing we were just able to play reasonably well time and time again in the practice room comes out jumbled and full of mistakes, despite the long hours we may have spent practicing it. This can be extremely frustrating and leads to many people burning out or just giving up. People are often left with the false impression that no matter how much time they spend practicing, they just don't have the natural talent necessary to perform at a high level. What many musicians don't realize is that the problem isn't that they don't practice enough or that they don't have enough natural talent. It's that they are spending those long hours in the practice room utilizing bad habits that are setting them up to fail when they are nervous in a performance setting. What I'm getting at here is that most people practice wrong. Not only do most people practice wrong, many people don't even have a regular system or strategy they use to learn and recall music accurately. And then they're surprised when they freeze up or underperform on stage. In this video, I'm going to talk about how your brain creates new memories and moves those memories from short-term to long-term storage. But more importantly, I'm going to talk about how to practice so that you take advantage of this process. When you start practicing this way, you will see an immediate and remarkable improvement in how you perform even when you are nervous, your hands are shaky, and your brain is foggy. Best of all, practicing like this means you don't have to practice 4+ hours a day to play the music you're learning really well. And if you do want to put in those types of long hours, you can at least be sure you're not wasting most of your time. Okay, so first, let's talk about how most people practice and why it's not only frustrating and inefficient, but often counterproductive. Tell me if this sounds familiar. It's time for you to practice a piece of music that you intend to perform, and that music is at the intermediate to advanced level relative to your current skill with your instrument. Let's say you've already learned the notes and you start by playing it from the beginning, maybe a little bit slower than the speed at which you will eventually perform it. There are probably somewhere between 1 and 3 tricky or technically challenging sections throughout the piece. You might stumble a bit in those sections, and you may even pause to play those sections a few times, let's say 5 to 10 times, until you have played them a few times correctly, and then you move on until you have completed the piece. You probably also go back to practice these tougher sections, maybe using a metronome, before again attempting to play the piece all the way through from the beginning. You can repeat this process or variations of it until you have reached a sense that you have practiced sufficiently for the day. If this sounds familiar, then you are wasting much of the time you spend practicing. At this point, I should point out that if you find this approach to practicing rewarding, it is totally okay. We all enjoy music in our own way, and I don't mean this to shame anybody. The point I'm making it is if you intend to perform this music at the highest level you can with the fewest wrong notes and mistakes possible, not only are you wasting your time, but you're actually teaching yourself to consistently make mistakes. Don't feel bad though, this is a natural habit that most people fall into. I practiced this way until I was midway through college, where I majored in music. This approach fails because it prioritizes your short-term goals of playing the piece all the way through at or close to the goal speed, while skipping all of the steps that would allow you to play it reliably and accurately, even under pressure. To understand this, I want you to imagine that instead of practicing music, you're practicing basketball. High-level basketball players don't train by just shooting around or scrimmaging for hours. They spend time isolating and strengthening specific muscle groups that are needed to perfect their jump shots or agility. They do aerobic conditioning, drills that improve reaction time, dribbling and passing drills, endless layups, and carefully planned exercises that increase the accuracy of their shooting. In other words, they have figured out the ways to take advantage of the human body and brain and how to hack into its potential to learn the skills they need to perform at the highest possible level. Someone can practice basketball for 10 hours a day, casually shooting around or playing 3-on-3, but that will never yield the same results as a player practicing 2 hours a day using carefully thought out strategies that utilize the potential of their body and brain. When you practice music the way we went over earlier, you are doing the equivalent of casually shooting around, and no matter how many hours you spend doing it, you shouldn't be surprised when it doesn't result in a high level of performance. So what does optimal practicing look like? To answer this question, we need to first define what it is that you are trying to accomplish when you're practicing. Now, there are other aspects to practicing music other than what we'll talk about today that include scales, chords, music theory, and improvising. Today, we're going to be talking specifically about retaining music that you want to perform. Whether for a performance or audition, this is what most people spend most of their time practicing. At the most basic level, you are attempting to store information about the notes you are playing and the motions required to play those notes in a very deep and important part of your brain your long-term memory. Long-term memory is distributed across various parts of the brain, including the hippocampus, cerebellum, the cortex, and the basal ganglia. There are two different types of long-term memory, declarative and procedural. Declarative long-term memory is where you store facts that you are in no danger of forgetting, like what is the capital of America, or what is your phone number. Procedural long-term memory is where you store your knowledge of how to do tasks without even thinking about them, like riding a bike or signing your name. When you are practicing music, your goal should be to move the information into procedural long-term memory so thoroughly that you don't need to be consciously worried about what notes you will play next, but instead you can focus on more musical elements like dynamics and expression. Virtuosic performers are able to play incredibly intricate and complex music in front of thousands of people because they have done such a good job of moving the information to procedural long-term memory that their body knows how to play masterfully without much conscious thought. The reason the approach to practicing described earlier fails is because that it does a very sloppy job of moving information into procedural long-term memory. Even worse, by regularly making mistakes in the harder sections, you are accidentally embedding these mistakes into your procedural long-term memory. This is the memory you are drawing on when it comes time to perform, so it should be no surprise that it seems almost impossible to perform as well as you would like, even if you have spent many hours practicing. You have spent those hours embedding the wrong information into your most crucial memory stores. So how can you practice so that you're filling your procedural long-term memory with information on how to play the music as close to perfect as possible? I'm going to break this down into 5 separate steps. Starting with step number 1, always, and I mean always, practice the music so that you do not play wrong notes or rhythms. Even on the very first day you start learning a piece of music, do not let yourself play wrong notes. This means that you need to start at a very slow speed, maybe 1/2 or even 1/3 of your final goal tempo, and use a metronome at all times to ensure you resist the temptation to speed up too soon. Playing the music note perfect from day 1 is incredibly important because as you are learning the music, you are creating new synapses between neurons in your brain. Every time you play the notes correctly, the neurons along the pathways that you are shaping in your brain create more and more receptors, which generates more neurotransmitters. This is called long-term potentiation, or LTP, and it's the reason that repetition allows you to memorize music. However, if you are regularly playing the wrong notes or rhythms, this LTP will form synapses and pathways that will encourage the same mistakes in the future. For this reason, it is incredibly important that you start by practicing however slowly you need to in order to construct clear and consistent neural pathways. If you are able to do this, when you eventually perform the music, you will literally not have the pathways available in your brain to make mistakes. So that is step number 1. Practice slow enough that even on day 1, you are playing the correct notes and rhythms every time. Step number 2 is to learn notes in small chunks. Before you move information into long-term memory, it must first go through your short-term memory, more frequently referred to as working memory. The number of individual units of information humans can retain in their working memory is between 5 and 9, with an average of 7. Most phone numbers are 7 digits long, and you will likely find that trying to remember a phone number someone has just told you is right at the limit of your ability to retain it. Now, most music is grouped in 4s and 8s, so let's call 8 the maximum number of notes you should be trying to process, learn, and retain at a time. If you try to learn more than 8 notes, you will probably not be able to recall those notes consistently and accurately, and there is a high chance that you will be developing the wrong neural pathways as you move that data into your long-term memory. So you have the small chunk of 8 notes, but how do you know it has been moved into your long-term memory? You need to repeat these 8 notes at a very slow tempo to ensure accuracy. There are a range of opinions and data about how many times you need to repeat a piece of information before it moves into your long-term memory. Most estimates range from 7 to 30 times depending on the complexity of the information you want to learn. My experience has been that 20 repetitions should be enough to do the trick, as long as you are playing them slowly and accurately. After you have played this chunk 20 times, it is very, very important that you do not immediately move on to learning the next chunk. Even after those 20 reps, your brain still needs time to move those notes from working memory to long-term memory. And if you fill your working memory with new information, you will interrupt this process. What you should do after those 20 reps is take a break. Literally, do something else for 5 to 10 minutes, as long as it doesn't involve trying to memorize something. Whatever it is you do during this break, scrolling through your phone, getting a snack, this time is crucial to allowing your brain to develop the proper synapses for the neural pathways that you have started plowing in your brain. When you come back from this break, it is still not time to learn a new chunk. You need to play the first chunk again 5 to 10 times, slowly with perfect note accuracy, to make sure the information has been accurately moved from your short-term to long-term memory. My experience has been that in order to avoid overloading your working memory, you should limit the number of new chunks you learn per practice session to 3 or 4. While this might sound like a slow and tedious process, when you consider that most pieces of music you learn will be at most 5 minutes long, 10 minutes at the most, and much of the notes and phrases are repeated many times, you will learn the vast majority of songs within a few weeks, which is a very short amount of time relative to how long most musicians spend practicing songs that they intend to perform. More importantly, you can be sure that time has been spent carving neural pathways into your long-term procedural memory that will have a high rate of accuracy and recall even when you are nervous. Okay, so step number 2 is learn in small chunks of up to 8 notes. Step 3 is to practice overlapping chunks. After learning groups of 8 notes in steps 1 and 2, you can start to link those groups into larger phrases that make sense musically. It is important to gradually increase the size of those chunks so that you do not exceed your ability to recall the notes accurately. Let's say, for example, you are practicing measures 1 through 8 as one chunk and measures 9 through 16 as another. The problem with this is that you are moving the habit of stopping at the end of measure 8 into your procedural long-term memory, and this can cause you to hesitate or make mistakes as you move into measure 9. There are 2 different ways to solve this problem. One is instead of playing measures 1 through 8 as one chunk and 9 through 16 as the other, have your first chunk end at the end of measure 9. That way you have an overlap between the 2 chunks and you do not internalize the habit of stopping between them. Another way to address this problem would be to have a different chunk, maybe measure 5 through 12, that allows you to practice that same transition. Okay, that is step 3, practice overlapping chunks. Step 4 is to increase your speed slowly and methodically. All of your practice at this point should be done with a metronome, starting at 50% of the goal speed, if not slower. Let's say, for example, you are practicing a piece of music that you would like to perform at or around 150 beats per minute. And on day 1, you are learning the notes at 70 beats per minute. Do not increase the speed until the next day, and when you do, only increase it by 2 beats per minute to 72 beats per minute. This change in speed will be imperceptible to you. Playing the same notes at 72 beats per minute will feel just like it did the day before at 70, and that is the entire point of doing it this way. Increasing your speed by only 2 beats per minute per day will allow you to maintain the ease of playing those notes with perfect accuracy as if you were still at 70 beats per minute, even as you get up to 80, 90, 100, and 110 beats per minute, closer and closer to your goal tempo, all the while maintaining the habit of 100% accuracy with notes and rhythms. If you want to know how virtuosic musicians can play fast and complex music as if it were easy, it's because it is easy for them. As long as you increase your speed slow enough, you will maintain the ease of playing the music even as it gets faster and faster. At this point in your practicing, 20 reps per chunk is all you need, as neural pathways will be so thoroughly carved into your hippocampus that there is no longer the need to take breaks to allow information to move into your procedural long-term memory. It is already there in its most pristine form. You do not necessarily need to maintain this rate of increasing speed at 2 beats per minute all the way to the end. There is a threshold, usually around 80% of your goal tempo, where you can start increasing the speed 4, maybe 5 beats per minute per day without sacrificing accuracy and consistency, because the music is now in your procedural long-term memory, and it will be as easy to play as riding a bike or speaking your native language. So that is step 4. Increase your speed slowly and methodically. The 5th and final step is a short and simple one. Once you have spent all this time and diligence getting yourself to the point where you can play the piece at your goal tempo without missing notes or rhythms, it is crucial that you record yourself playing through the piece and listening back carefully. If you spend a lot of time practicing a piece of music, you can lose perspective on what it sounds like to someone who has never heard it before. There will probably be spots where you are speeding up or slowing down without even realizing it. What I found is that often when I think I am playing dramatic crescendos or decrescendos, when I listen back to the recording, those dynamic changes aren't coming through nearly as well as I thought they did. A useful way to listen to yourself is to first listen to some of your favorite music, maybe in the same genre as the piece you're playing, and then listen to your recording. This will give you some context for what you can improve on, so you can enjoy listening to your own playing. Professional athletes will watch tape of their games to learn how to fix their weaknesses, and musicians should do the same by recording themselves. The best part is after doing this a few times, you will start to recognize your bad habits and tendencies, and you will be able to anticipate them while you are playing, allowing you to hone in on and fix smaller and smaller details. So these are the 5 steps of optimal practicing. Play the correct notes slowly, learn in small chunks, practice overlapping chunks, increase tempo slowly and methodically, and record yourself playing. You might be thinking that this seems like a long, boring, and laborious way to practice, and I felt the same way when I first heard about it from one of my professors in college. I gave it a try though, and yes, it does require some discipline and patience, but after a few weeks, I noticed that I was enjoying practicing more than I ever had in my entire life. It wasn't just because I was able to perform with a level of accuracy and consistency that I had never experienced before. It was because practicing had gone from being something that I had to guilt myself into doing to becoming the best part of my day. It took me a while to figure out why this was, but eventually I realized that every time I sat down to play, I was succeeding with every rep of every section I played. Yes, I had to play slower, for longer, but there was none of that consistent frustration of missing notes regularly and consistently flubbing the trickier sections. Combined with finally being able to perform under pressure at a level that I had never been able to achieve before, this practice method has massively improved my experience of and relationship with music. Now when I walk through a high school band room or a hallway of practice rooms in a collegiate music school, and I hear that familiar pattern of students trying to play the music they're working on way too fast with predictable and regular mistakes, I find myself frustrated that their teachers don't know or haven't told them how to practice so that they're not etching wrong notes into their long-term memory. These 5 steps don't work because I say they do or because I want them to. They work because they utilize how your brain processes and stores information. One more time, I want to reiterate that you can practice however you want to. We all have our own relationship with music and goals for what we want to get out of it. But at least now when you hear someone brag about practicing their instrument for 5 hours, you know that means very little unless they, like you, know how to practice.